Thank you for joining me for another episode of Trip Report. On today's episode, I'm going to talk about my experience with cannabis-assisted psychotherapy. I've never been a huge fan of cannabis. It was something I never got into in my younger years in life. When it did come around in my teenage years and other friends began to experiment with it, it was around the time that I got into riding BMX. And those friends who were fellow BMX riders that began experimenting with pot, they quickly had more interest in smoking than they did with riding bikes. And I think I kind of rationalized it in my head as it would make me lazy, it would make me quit riding BMX. And so I just kind of steered clear of it because I was worried that it would take, one of my passions away from me. That aside, if I would be at parties in high school and see friends smoking, they would just look stupid and, sit there and just chuckle. And I don't know, it didn't appeal to me as something that I wanted to try or that I wanted to get into. And there's no doubt that some of my fear-mongering dare education was lingering and carried over with, this stuff's going to ruin your brain and all that kind of stuff. And again, to see people in this like stupefied looking state and then having that thought process of it's going to ruin your brain and short-term memory and all that kind of stuff, all of the different levels of it had turned me away from wanting to have any experience with pot at all in my younger years. And then after high school, joined the military and clearly, couldn't smoke in the military. So that was a good 5-year chunk of my life that I, wouldn't even mess with it. And then during that last year, whenever I was getting ready to get out, I would tell a lot of my friends who weren't in the military, people, back in Pittsburgh or friends that had gotten out sooner, I would say to them, oh yeah, as soon as I get out of the military, I'll smoke with you. Just looking ahead of, not having any more restrictions put on my life. I'm just going to go off the rails and do whatever I'm going to do. But when that time came, I still didn't really have any interest in it. And my ex-wife, she was one of the few people that I knew who hadn't smoked either. So we kind of had this like running thing of like, oh, we're the two people on this planet that have never tried cannabis. And I mean, I don't know if there was any reason to be proud of that, but I just really had no interest in it at all. So fast forward, what really kind of started to change my mind was my girlfriend and I went to the Arizona Psychedelic Conference in 2018. And the way that it was set up is there was, I believe, 3 different stages. So if you looked at the schedule, you could pick one of 3 different seminars to attend throughout the day. And one of the first ones, whenever we arrived, was holotropic breath work, which I was super interested in, but clearly everybody else was too. And that one filled up immediately and we weren't able to get in there. So of the 2 remaining, the one that looked more interesting to me, and I don't even know if I thought it was interesting, but it was cannabis-assisted psychotherapy. So because that was the better of the 2 that were remaining, we went in and sat in on that. It was presented by a guy named Saj Razvi, and he worked for a company called Innate Path. What he was able to show was that cannabis, when used in the appropriate setting, had the potential to be as powerful as all of the traditional psychedelics. So he had shown 2 different patients who he had taken through his protocol, and they looked as if they were on ayahuasca or something along those lines because they had full body tremors, they were crying, they were sweating, they were shivering. One guy vomited. So I sat there and looked, and it really kind of gave me a whole new appreciation on what cannabis was capable of. Because prior to this, I think I just had always thought cannabis was this, I would consider it a plant medicine, but I figured it was just like a Band-Aid that people continuously slapped on their traumas, that it was not capable of getting to the root cause of any of the issues that people were having. Because most of the people that I know over the years that use cannabis, although it's not quote unquote addictive, or people don't have a physical dependency on it, I know so many people who have a habitual dependency, or they can't function normally in life, especially sleeping. I just know so many people who can't get through life, it seems, without cannabis. So, if they go off of cannabis, they spiral out of control. And that further proves my point. If it's just this Band-Aid that they're slapping on trauma and they're just pushing it back down instead of actually getting at the root cause of it. However, after watching what Saj was able to do with people, I came to realize that cannabis may have the potential to get deeper in and do some permanent work. But again, it comes to set and setting and doing it the right way for it to work. So when it was all said and done, seeing his seminar, I was pretty interested. I was like, you know what, this is something that I might actually look into trying myself. And he was out of Colorado. I ended up talking to him at the mixer afterwards, and he was super backed up. I mean, his patient load was too far out. But we exchanged emails afterwards, and he said that he knew he had trained somebody who practiced in Orange County and that I could get in touch with this guy. Again, it just never really worked out. But then going into the whole, you don't find psychedelics, they find you when you're ready. Interestingly enough, I, through a Meetup app, found a psychedelic integration group that was run by the Aware Project, which started out of Los Angeles, and they got a chapter here in San Diego. And before COVID, it was in-person integration groups, which were actually really interesting. And it was run by a lady named Carol. And although they were very interesting, and I think there was a lot of good information shared and a lot of people were helped out with some of their more difficult experiences, it seemed as if the reason she was hosting these integration groups was just to promote her business as a cannabis-assisted practitioner with psychotherapy. Either way, like I said, it was on my radar. So she talked about it after every single meetup group. So I figured maybe I should just give it a go and see what she has to offer. So I talked with her and we got it scheduled. And while flipping through my journal now, I looked at my intentions, and my intentions were healing, looking for trauma. And then I was looking at the potential origin of my bald spot and eyelid redness, which were two of the leading symptoms that I had related to the lupus. So I figured if I could deep dive into my psyche, maybe I could figure out where those two symptoms specifically came from. And prior to this appointment, I had recently purchased a volcano vaporizer because I had heard that was the best way to smoke DMT. So I figured what a better way to break this thing out or test it, figure out how to use it, than to bring it along for this experience, because I hate smoking stuff. So I didn't want to have to smoke from a pipe or something like that that would burn my lungs and take away from the experience. So again, I figured great time to break in this volcano thing and see how it goes. So the date was July 10th of 2020. She worked out of her home and I showed up. She walked me up to the office she had set up, and it was basically just a couch, some blankets, pillows. She had eye shades that I was going to wear, and then she had like a surround sound system set up in there. And she explained how everything was going to go. She explained that I forget what the specific mixture of cannabis strains that she had was, but she kept referring to them as a psychedelic mixture. And she said that once I was getting into the state that she would begin playing music, and it would be varying styles of music across the board. And she kept saying that it was invocative music, and that if I didn't like the style of music that came up, since it was kind of bouncing all over the place, that it was my responsibility to just go inside and figure out why I didn't like that kind of music, and that it was essentially to just like pry deeper into my psyche, which I actually liked that concept. And whenever I started to build my own high dose psychedelic tripping playlist over the years, I kind of take that into account. I bring in some like easy music and throw in, as you go along, some more difficult things that are likely to push you into darker areas. And I feel that it works very well for getting people into the more difficult experiences in these sessions. So before we started, she pulled out a deck of tarot cards and pulled one for me. And I don't know that I buy into any of that kind of stuff, but the card that she pulled out was a cat. And she asked me if there was any significance to that. I said, well, I'm allergic to cats, but I don't know that that has anything to do with you pulling this card. And it didn't really make any sense to me at the time, but especially with my most recent ayahuasca ceremony, I think I made the connection with all of that. So we'll reflect back on that when that episode comes out. So we decided to get going, and I fired up the volcano, filled the whole bag up, and basically worked my way through inhaling that first bag. After that first bag, I felt absolutely nothing. And I've heard all the stories of people saying, like, the first time you smoke, you don't get high. And I thought, well, man, maybe that's the case, but like, this sucks. Like, if I paid all this money to do this cannabis-assisted psychotherapy and I don't get high, it defeats the purpose. So she was like, just fill another bag. So we did that. I inhaled everything out of the other bag. And what I wrote in the journal was, I think I could see Carol's aura. And so I decided to pull the eye shades down. So clearly something was going on that made me realize, okay, it's time to get started with this. So with the eye shades down, I started seeing what I referred to as meditation-ish visuals. So it was the same type of visuals that I see when I'm just sober meditating, but they were purple rather than the goldish yellow color that I normally see. And as those meditation-ish visuals continued, they began to develop into slightly more patterns than normal, but they were nowhere near the level of like a mushroom, LSD, like a tryptamine experience. So the visuals, very, very mild. So we just started to cycle through the music. She had a pretty good playlist, and I just let my mind wander. Something popped up where I had recently was going through storage, and I came across a picture album from my wedding with my ex-wife. And I was flipping through it, and I had such a bizarre feeling that when I saw myself in those photos, it didn't feel like it was me. Like the wedding was pre-plant medicine. I was at a state in life where I was post-plant medicine. And it was like I was looking at somebody that I didn't even know, or like I was looking through an album of, like people that I knew, but it was like, it wasn't me that was in there, which is a very bizarre disconnect to have. So it was almost as if I was flipping through this album again while I was in the experience. And when I saw myself this time, it wasn't disconnected. It wasn't that it wasn't me, but I saw me and I had empathy for me that was in the photos. The thought process that I had was that I was doing the best that he could with the compounding trauma that he was dealing with. And in the photos, it seemed like in the photos with myself and the ex-wife that it looked like I had very little love on my face or in the pictures for her. But then in the photos that I saw with my parents, the love was there. So it was pretty interesting. And what I thought was maybe the loving relationships that started before I started hating myself had stuck while it became difficult to build new loving relationships. And I may have mentioned it in a previous episode, but when shit hit the fan with the ex-wife, she had told me, I just don't feel any love from you. And it was hard because, I felt it for her, but I didn't know how to share it because I couldn't love myself. And, the thought that I had was just that she deserves better. At this point, I felt like I hit a stopping point, or that maybe I was just sobering up. So she offered me a 5 milligram edible. So I ate that and then ended up smoking 2 more bags from the vaporizer. At that point, I dropped back into it and I felt my hands get very warm, like they were charging up or kind of swelling with energy. And then very bizarrely, I saw this like black double helix of negative energy, looking like a DNA helix kind of thing. And it was coming up out of my hip, from my right glute through my hip, kind of going out to nothing. And at that point, when I focused on it, that glute began to emanate like a rainbow pulse, which is really weird. So it was like seeing her aura and then seeing the energy in my head and then seeing like the energy at my hip. And as it pulsed and released the energy, I got this really strong contraction in my right glute. And then it just released and let go in a way that I feel like I've never had it let go before. And then my butt cheek felt fuller. It was almost as if like it inflated, which was super weird too. And the only thing that kind of sparks up why this makes any sense for me is that a few years prior, I had a BMX injury where I looped out and went straight to that right butt cheek. And it was like the funny bone feeling. I just kind of like rolled around writhing in pain for a little bit. And then it went straight black and blue. Like purple butt cheek for a solid week. And I didn't know any better at the time. And I didn't get in there as it was healing and break up any of the scar tissue. So I just had like all this nerve damage and all sorts of problems in that right glute. And I think it locked up all the fascia going up into the back and down into the leg. And for the next year, I kind of had some lower back issues that kind of ran down to that right butt cheek. And now that I look back at it, I mean, the lower back pain greatly dissipated after this experience. So pretty interesting, but it seems like the physical trauma of that was somehow released in this experience. So the music kept going, the mind kept wandering, and then it bumped back to the ex-wife again. And it brought up a scene from one of her cousin's weddings, and her uncle was there, and he was just dancing up a storm. And it was just like, I could see him dancing again. And it was like very, like when you see hippies in the 70s dancing, that like psychedelic dancing, that's what he was doing. And I was like, man, that guy is woke. Like he knows some stuff. He's seen some stuff, whatever. And her grandfather was a 2-star admiral in the Navy. And her father followed in his footsteps, became a Navy pilot. And then her aunt became a well-respected lawyer. And it was like they were in this military, just, I don't know, just that like military family, that whole just military dynamic of a family of conforming and all of that. And there was this uncle who was the black sheep, and he was off doing his own thing. And it was very interesting to me to see how one child can divert off that path and not go to that, not be stuck in that military cycle. And that being said, he looked like he was having the best of times compared to the rest of his siblings that were there. And then the thought process came to me that I was just super glad to see that my ex-wife and all of her siblings were such free spirits, also being raised in a military household. And I just thought to myself, it was no doubt that it was because their mother's free spirit awesomeness carrying through into their souls just made them these just free spirited, wonderful people. After that, everything just kind of wore off. It tapered off, and I don't know if she offered for me to go back in again or if we were at the end of our time, but that was just kind of the end of the experience. All being said and done, the music, it sounded cool, but it was nothing like a true psychedelic. So if I was only doing an experience to like really appreciate music, I wouldn't choose Cannabis for that. That being said, I found a couple of tracks in her playlist that were unbelievable, and I brought those over into my playlist that I use, and I'm really glad that I found them. So I was like, even if this was just very overpriced smoking weed in this lady's house, at least what I walked away with was a couple of solid tracks for my playlist going forward. All in all, I would say it was a successful experience. Was it worth $600? Absolutely not. Is it possible to duplicate it on my own? Absolutely. So, I mean, I guess if I was just to pop an edible, smoke some pot, and then sit back and listen to my normal tripping playlist, I think I could probably get to the same spot that I was in. But I also don't feel like that spot was as therapeutic as psilocybin, ayahuasca, LSD, all these other things could be. So would I send anybody her way for this therapy? I don't think so. The only way that I think I would recommend cannabis-assisted psychotherapy to somebody is if they were unwilling to do anything quote unquote illegal, because, all the traditional psychedelics are still in the Schedule 1 category. So if somebody's unwilling to do an underground therapy or go out of the country where it is legal, then maybe cannabis is a good place for them to start. Also, somebody who's unwilling to do the stuff that is approved here. So like ketamine therapy is approved in most states, and that's a possibility. So if somebody is afraid of doing ketamine therapy, then at least there's, at this point, I guess, less stigma around cannabis. So maybe I would suggest that they do it. And I guess, like, as cheesy as it is to say, I guess that cannabis is the perfect gateway drug to healing trauma and finding your way into the more potent plant-based therapeutics that are out there. So yeah, this was a short one. Like I said, it's something that I'm glad that I did do. Wouldn't do it again, but I do think I unpacked a few things and got some healing that I may not have otherwise gotten. And like I've said before, I think all of these different plant medicines open different doors. And although smaller doors, not as profound for me, not as life-changing for me, I do think that this experience did unlock a little bit of healing. And I certainly don't regret doing it. So there you have it, my first and only experience with cannabis-assisted psychotherapy. Short and sweet, but hopefully you enjoyed it. Until next time, thanks for joining me. Take care. Love you guys.